You're listening to the Whole Church Podcast, a proud member of the Anazal Podcast Network. Our efforts to educate and unite the church are made possible thanks to our sponsors on Patreon, Captivate, and Apple Podcast. You could join them on one of those networks, or you can support the show by making a one-time tip on our Captivate website down below in the show's description.
Galatians chapter 3, verses 26 through 29. For in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God through faith. As many of you were baptized into Christ, have clothed yourselves with Christ. There is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male or female. For all of you are one in Christ Jesus. And if you belong to Christ, there you are, Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise. Father Derek, when you hear this verse, what are some things that come to your mind about the community of Christ and the work of ecumenism and church unity?
Yeah, well, I often, my default is often to be like, what this verse doesn't mean. That's where my mind often goes, because oftentimes this is used to as a passage that seeks to sort of erase some of the things that are parts of our identity and that make us unique. But I think this is emphasizing a primary kind of collecting identity, which is baptism, that signifies our belonging in Christ. So it's that we all are, by virtue of our faith in Christ and our baptism, that we belong to one another. And so these identities, which often can be used not just to distinguish us, but as the ones that are listed here, often connote like power relationships and dynamics, like those pieces are also sort of deconstructed and reimagined through baptism and our shared belonging. So this is often kind of used to like talk about like we're all one in Christ, but I feel like that can sometimes erase the things that make us unique and distinct, and also get us out of thinking about how we're related to each other through our diversity. And so I can't help but think about this. I am an American Anglican, and so I think about Richard Hooker, who talks about this, an Anglican priest who talks about how the church is a society, not just an assembly. And so assemblies are about gathering together about things we share in common with one another, but a society is what has been assembled in Christ. And I think that's what St. Paul is talking about here in Galatians.
Nice. Great stuff. Thanks, Father Derek. Hello, friends. Welcome to an episode of the Whole Church Podcast, possibly your favorite church unity podcast. I am your guest host, Will Rose, or as TJ likes to call me, Chill Will with all the thrills. Yes, he said that to me in an email, and we all know TJ's status among the core lords of podcasting out there. So when you give you a title like that, you feel pretty special. Joshua cannot make this episode today, and either could TJ. And so I am filling in. I've been on a number of episodes of Whole Church and Partners in Crime with Joshua when it comes to systematic ecology and other podcast projects. Joshua had a family emergency and still recovering and getting back on their feet. And they really do, he shared with me, they really do appreciate everyone's support, whether it was a GoFundMe page or just prayers and moral support. He's really appreciative. So I'm gonna get through this podcast and help him out and have some fantastic conversation with a new friend, Father Derek. And we have another guest host here with us today. You've heard his voice before and other things and other podcasts that Joshua has done in his own podcast, Rethinking Faith. He's here for moral and spiritual support. And for those who know Josh, when you talk about spiritual support, they're double taking and kind of making sure they listen correctly what I just said on the podcast. But I look to him for a lot of support. Josh, how you doing today, buddy? Thanks for hanging out with us. Thanks for making this connection.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I've done a couple episodes with Joshua on Whole Church and other related things. So always excited to be back. And I'm glad that I haven't been banned from this space yet. I appreciate the welcome. You guys put your money where your mouth is when it comes to the whole ecumenical aspect and seeking church unity, because not everybody is always so kind to me.
Right. You've written yourself some sticky notes of some things to guard against and things, and we trust you with that. If you forget, that's okay. There's a wide spectrum in Christian unity, and
I'm putting
a
a hedge
table
of protection around my words.
Well, and Josh, we know that it is the kindness of the Lord that leads to repentance. So
yes.
that's what we're embodying right now.
Yeah. Smaller walls, longer tables. That's what we try to do here at Whole Church. And so with the Whole Church, we're part of a network of podcasts called the Anazal Ministry Podcast Network. And so if you're listening on the Anazal Podcast YouTube channel, of course, subscribe. There's a merch store. There's paid subscriptions on Captivate and Apple Podcast and Patreon. You know all the things. You guys who've listened to this you're not rookies when it comes to podcasting. You know to hit the like and subscribe and merch and share and review. You know all those things. But yeah, as Joshua likes to share that his favorite tool or gift or way to unity and to break down barriers and walls is a silly question. And so TJ sent me a silly question, but I'm totally ignoring that one and using the one that's in my head. And the one in my head that I forewarned them about is, this is the silly question. I was asked this at an icebreaker at a young adult thing at our church not too long ago. And so, silly question. If you could fill a swimming pool with anything other than water and swim in it, what would it be? We're going to let Father Derek think about this one for a moment, and I'm going to go right to Josh. We're going to see if there's a hedge of protection of what comes out of his mouth. Yeah, if you could fill a pool with anything and then, cannonball into that thing, what would you fill it with?
Probably West Coast IPA. A solid West Coast IPA, because, it would be beer, but there wouldn't be a lot of residual sugar, so it wouldn't be as sticky.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be interesting. It would taste a lot better if it got in your mouth. Better than chlorine. So,
right.
Yeah, and plus it's my favorite style of beer, so we'll go with the West Coast IPA filled swimming pool.
Would you wear earplugs? Would you let it get in your ears? What if some really hazy hoppy IPAs got in your eardrums? What do you think? Man.
Yeah, maybe that might be a good call. I didn't contemplate that, but that seems good. Your years of wisdom are showing forth, Will.
Years of swimming experience, and I immediately I kind of thought of like chocolate pudding. That would be fun. Just a pool full of chocolate pudding and cannonball into that thing. But then I'm a big hop fan and love IPA. So I think I'm gonna have to go with you too. I know people are thinking, we knew Will was gonna say that. But this is what I also, being a big time geek and reading a lot of comic books and seeing how superpowers happen and occur. I want to be swimming in the pool of IPA, and that pool gets struck by lightning. And when it does, I get infused with beer powers. And I'll be beer man, and I can either shoot beer out of my fingertips or eyeballs, or I don't know, but I'll have the power of all beer, control over all beer, is kind of where I'm thinking my origin story is going to be. So that's what's ruminating in my head and heart right now. So there you go. There's your story. If there's a plug out, if there are any comic book creators out there and you want to write that graphic novel, I'm your partner in that. I got ideas. Father Derek, how about you? What do you think?
Yeah. So I also initially had similar thoughts to both of you. I thought about beer. I thought about pudding. For me, it would have been banana pudding instead of chocolate.
Nice.
Like with vanilla wafers in it. But then I thought, I don't want to swim in things that I like to eat or drink, because that's gross.
Yeah.
And so maybe it's just because in my mind I was remembering bath time with my son and me trying to get him to stop drinking his own bath water, because that's disgusting. So I was like, instead of that, what I had in mind immediately, DuckTales and Scrooge McDuck swimming in his vault of coins.
Yes.
And I thought, I had this very young dream of doing that, which of course would also be physically impossible and hurt a lot, I'm sure. But it would be really cool to be able to
the ball
do.
pit at Chuck E. Cheese, except with gold coins.
Yeah. Except the balls are just large gold coins.
It would hurt so good. It would hurt so good. It's funny. I was just listening to a friend of the show, Ryan Doze's podcast today. He was interviewing a very famous and well-off Marvel comic book creator, Jason Aaron, and they were talking about just this morning his one issue that he wrote of Scrooge McDuck, and they talked about diving into a pool of coins, and they were just talking about that, and I was like, man, see, look at this. I love it. Yeah, maybe. Good. All right, fun. Yeah, silly questions. I could do silly questions all day. Again, thanks for listening, folks. I'm very happy for this episode. One, I get to hang out with Josh again, but he made a connection, and maybe you guys share it. Father Derek, we're going to get to your story in a minute, and your call to ministry, your contacts for ministry, and thoughts on ecumenism and church unity. But share you guys' connection and how this came about. How did we come here today on this episode? Josh, how do you know Father Derek?
Yeah, so for listeners who don't know, I used to be a pastor. I did that for almost 6 years. And then for a wide variety of very good reasons, I stopped doing that and became a brewer. And then brewing essentially wasn't sustainable. And so I started to look into other work and noticed, actually, Noel found the posting for a job at St. Peter's. And so that was pretty cool, but it was very nervous. It was kind of a big deal for me to kind of risk stepping back into the church world. And so when I went and interviewed, I was very honest about that. And Derek was super open and receptive to that. And so, I had it was a little bit too short. Things didn't fully work out. Just again, financial reasons, nothing bad happened. Derek and I are still friends. So I had to leave, but it was about a year, and it was a pretty healing experience for me. A lot of my negative thoughts that I had about all churches are like this, or, whatever, were kind of broken up a bit. I got to have tons of fun theological, philosophical conversations with Derek, where he entertained my craziness. And sometimes supported it, sometimes would give me really helpful feedback and pushback to things. And so when I heard Joshua talking about the idea for this particular, format of the show, I immediately was like, oh, Father Derek would be perfect. He has his own story that I'm excited that he gets to tell. And I think he's a priest that doesn't suck. And there's not too many clergy members that I still hang out with, and I'm in his what is this StreamYard call with 2 out of a handful. So this is a high percentage of clergy I interact with on a regular basis in one space, and so thanks for including me.
You're welcome. Derek and I are going to create a closed Facebook group or some website that says, ministers or priests who don't suck. And it's just it's a club that you have to be invited to, and then there's initiations, and then you have to prove your worthiness over the course of the year. But that's a great. I feel honored to be a part of that group. But I think as someone who's been an ordained pastor, Lutheran pastor for coming up on 25 years, the church is an organism. It's an institution. It's a body. There's a reason St. Paul uses kind of body language, organism language to talk about how it operates. And there's healthy times and there's unhealthy times. And sometimes you can go to the doctor, and sometimes you get sick, and sometimes it needs to die. Sometimes all that stuff happens when it comes to churches. And Josh and I both share some time in South Florida and some a little bit of conversation around what church can be or shouldn't be or can be or should be around those things. But I am glad that you were able to get back in church on an administrative role to kind of see, to get back to the basics of people and community and watching Father Derek shepherd a community and all that goes into that kind of relational ministry work. So yeah, that makes me happy. Father Derek, share us. Your story. You're a big part of what Joshua and TJ do is they like to hear stories, and whether it's a testimony or own personal stories in terms of faith and wrestling with faith, deconstruction, reconstruction, what all that means. And then your faith story, your personal story, and then what led you into ministry and your context for ministry today. So we'll give you give you the microphone and let you run with it.
That's great. That's great. Well, yeah, really, really glad to be here with you guys and share more of that. So I am from the suburbs of Atlanta. It's where I grew up, and my faith story is connected with my family's story. So my dad is a Southern Baptist pastor. My grandfather, my mom's dad, is also a Southern Baptist pastor and was a traveling evangelist. Wow. And I was born into that world, that sort of like new South Southern Baptist, experiencing the baby boom, families getting settled in the suburbs life. And so that's what I was born and raised into. I'm very grateful for a very loving family. And overall, I would say more on the healthier side of church spectrum for most of my time. It's not to say there weren't some difficulties, but also being a pastor's kid, I got the front row seat to like all of it, right? The highs and the lows, the ugly white underbelly, as well as the really high moments. And so, that's a part of my church experience. I don't remember a time not being in church. I was born on a Wednesday. I'm pretty sure I was in church the following Sunday. And I'm pretty sure my dad was like, should I miss Wednesday night prayer meeting for my son's birth? Or should I, what do we do? So big part of life. I remember having a experience where I became aware that I wanted to be with God forever, and experienced that under my grandfather's preaching, and made the decision to be baptized when I was about 5 years old. I still have this visceral memory of standing on a cinder block in the baptistry, because we baptized by immersion. And so I had to stand on that so that people in the church could see me because I was still so young. And my dad baptized me. I had this experience of trying to figure out my faith for myself for most of my life, because it was very much inherited in a lot of ways. And so I had to wrestle with that and struggle with that myself. I was asked all the time, Derek, are you going into the family business? And I would say, no, that is not what I want to do. I was really into music and found that to be a really great way to connect with God and with other people. And so played in all kinds of bands in high school and college, played in church bands. When I figured out that I could drive and go to other churches rather than to my parents' church, I found out that people would pay me to play music at their churches. I started experiencing all these other churches as well. Especially in that time, there were like new churches being planted all over in every single middle school and high school in our county, and so I had that experience. And then it was actually in the midst of playing music with some friends, and we realized that this band that we'd really tried to kind of make a go of was not going to go any further. I had, in the course of my time there, realized that as much as I enjoyed the music, what I really connected to was connecting with people relationally. A lot of these young kids, middle school, high school kids, come into our shows and staying after, and we would go to whatever diner was open and drink crappy coffee, and they would just talk, and they would share about how they've had painful religious experiences, or that they feel misunderstood, or they don't feel like they belong. And I realized that I felt that way some too. And so we connected over that and realized that it's important to have places and spaces to do that. And for people to feel like they can belong and be themselves. And I think that was the kind of the beginning of, a reframing of my own faith, but also the sort of beginnings of a sense of calling into something of like, could I be a part of helping to create that, and foster that? So, I ended up going to school for ministry because I felt like that was what I needed to do if I'm going to do church. So I went to a Bible college, a pretty conservative Bible college at a Southern Baptist seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. and had the beginnings of, I would say, sort of it was deconstruction before the term became, I was like an indie deconstructionist, right? Before it became cool. I was into it.
Before it was cool.
And,
what a hipster.
Gen Xer.
And And, of course, like all the stuff around the emerging church, there were conversations around that happening a lot. And like starting new churches was very much part of the conversation. And I was focusing a lot on, as a part of my program, not just biblical studies, but with a focus on, they have a program evangelism and church growth, and a focus on urban mission work. And so I was doing a lot of thinking in place in a post-industrial town in Louisville, Kentucky in the South around what is church supposed to look like and what does it look like. And I saw a lot of churches that had left their neighborhood context, much like, and set up communities much in like I had grown up, the suburbs around city centers. And that a lot of those folks were white and drove into church, into communities of color, and had their church and put how many people they had saved up on the board that week, and then drove back out of town and were not really engaged in the communities in which they were worshiping, or really the ones they were living. And that just really didn't sit well with me. Yeah. So I carried that with me. It's what brought me to move to the Baltimore area. I helped to plant a non-denominational (parentheses) Baptist church in Baltimore City, and that became my ministry context. It's where I recognized that and really clarified a call to vocational ministry, pastoral ministry. I was ordained in the church that I helped to start as the first minister that they ordained. And the questions continued and deepened and multiplied in context, because I was now living in a majority Black city as a young white dude from the suburbs, trying to help to start a new church in the city, and was confronted with a lot of things that I had not learned or had to unlearn and relearn. And developed a lot of relationships with people who were very different than folks I had grown up with. And my church did things really backwards because they'd never ordained anyone before. So they were like, yeah, we'll ordain you. And I was like, I think I should go to seminary. And they're like, you're probably right. You should. And so I started attending a place called St. Mary's Ecumenical Institute, which is it's actually the only ecumenical institute that exists in partnership with a Catholic seminary in the world. Wow. It was started right after Vatican II.
What's the name of that again, Derek? What is
St. Mary's Ecumenical Institute? It's housed within St. Mary's Seminary and University in Baltimore, Maryland. Mm-hmm. It's actually the nation's oldest Catholic seminary as well.
Wow.
And it was founded through ecumenical partnership and relationship between the Archbishop of Baltimore and the Bishop of the Diocese of Maryland, the Episcopal Bishop. They were golfing friends and also allied in desegregation efforts in Baltimore, and ended up starting this school. So I went to seminary part-time while doing ministry full-time, and we really provided the space for me to explore some of these deepening questions and concerns. And ultimately that led me to realize that the tradition, the church in which I was in, was no longer really the place where I could, with integrity and a sense of like fullness into calling, really live out my calling. And I ended up discerning that I was to join, to be confirmed in the Episcopal Church, and ended up starting the discernment process toward becoming an ordained Episcopal priest there, largely because a lot of my experiences at the Ecumenical Institute, actually. And I can share
Here's
more
the
about
danger.
that.
You start doing ecumenical work. Oh no, those waxes start open. Oh, wider world, wider universe. I love this.
Tell you. So anyway, there's obviously so much more to the story, but that's catches us up a little bit to today. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's great. Yeah, some of the stuff you talk about in terms of I'm a lifelong Lutheran and grew up Lutheran from my family heritage way back, going all the way to Germany and other places. But there was kind of moments of in terms of my own faith, in terms of rethinking or reframing things. I never had a moment of crisis and deconstruction, but I definitely, you go through it's typical normal human stuff if you're just growing as an individual, you're going to question things and rethink things and reframe things, and either you own it and do it your own way, or you change and find a place where you do belong. And so that journey, hearing that in you, finding a new home, but in terms of faith for yourself, and then how do you apply it and what do you feel called to or hear God's call to is pretty powerful. And the fact that you went to an ecumenical seminary to where you could see where that community work being done is pretty cool. So after seminary, after that, you're in your present context. Is this your first call? Have you been to other places before? How long have you been where you are, and what's your context for ministry there?
Yeah. First call as an Episcopal priest. And I've been here, I'm in my fourth year now at St. Peter's Episcopal Church. It's a small Episcopal church in Ellicott City, Maryland, which is a mill town community about 30 minutes outside of Baltimore City. They actually just recently celebrated their 250th anniversary as a city, and the church itself was founded in 1842. And particularly to serve the growing mill working community and merchant class here in this area. First call, so came in the fall. Well, I served actually in a bit of their transition. In our tradition, you are ordained as what they call a transitional deacon first before you're ordained a priest. And so I was able to serve as an associate, as a deacon here for a little bit of time. And then they allowed me to put my hat in the ring, so to speak, to be the rector priest here, lead priest. So fall of 2021 came here, and they had been through a lot of transition. I was their fifth priest in 10 years. And some of that planned, some of that unplanned. A church that is, as another colleague referred to them, an odd duck sort of church, which I really appreciate that characterization. I'm sure they would appreciate it too. But
all the ducks in the pond are like, wait, what? What are you talking about?
What?
Why are you slandering ducks? They're like, no, we know that duck over there. Yeah.
That one.
That one there.
So in the Episcopal Church, we're really kind of we like to talk about how we're a big tent. We have a lot of different sort of streams within the Episcopal Church, and so this church aligns itself a lot more on the sort of Catholic side of the spectrum, between sort of Catholic and Protestant, very high church in its worship. Even the fact that they call me Father Derek rather than just Derek or Reverend or something like that kind of speaks to some of that piety. And also they've been through a lot. The community here has been through really 3 catastrophic floods within 10 years of each other.
Wow.
And 2 of which were both referred to as 100-year flood events. And so devastating to the local community here, but also an opportunity for the church here to really step up and serve. They also, 6 years before the most recent flood, experienced a double homicide on the property here, one of which was the priest and the other was a parish administrator. And so, and that was an incident of gun violence. So a lot of trauma, a lot of some conflict, and then broader community issues. And so, and then, that whole pandemic thing. So that's that's the context.
Yeah.
That's
So if I'm counting, if I do my math right, you started there right at the tail in the midst of the pandemic, or right when we were starting to come out of the pandemic, 2021.
Yeah, that was the vaccines are going to save us time of the pandemic. Right. But my first official act I had to do, after my first Sunday, was send out a notice to the community to say, hey, we had this event and somebody tested positive for COVID. And so you need to monitor your symptoms and go get tested or isolate or whatever the protocols were then.
Yeah.
It was a challenging, not in the same way that it was challenging for others who were pastoring through that, through the beginning and onset, but still challenging nevertheless.
Yeah. When I was going through seminary, I was definitely looking up to the retired ministers who had pastored through World War II and hearing some of their stories, and me just looking at them as heroes going, what did you do? Like, how did you get through it? You sent people away to go fight in a war, and then how did they, half of them not coming back, kind of thing. And they were like, we just had to we did what we had to do. Like we made it through. And so now I feel like I'm going to be a retired pastor, and there's going to be people in seminary who are like, you were a pastor in the 2020s? Like, what? How'd you get through the 2020? I was like, we just had to do what we had to do. We got together, we figured it out. We built the plane while it was flying, and you tried to do your best to remain faithful to the community you're entrusted with. And that's definitely true. Well, I admire that. Like, I hear your story of the ecumenical connection of, like, you call yourself, you're Episcopal, but you lean towards kind of a Catholic understanding, sacramental understanding, high church understanding, but you did go to a seminary called St. Mary's, and the name of your church is St. Peter. So I could see where that would lean into. But then as I hear about, like, you reframing and shifting kind of your perspective and faith and approach to faith, and then the life of a church and a community and the role of the church in its community, you talk about the people work, but also that third sacrament of our traditions, coffee and gathering with people to have conversations. There's baptism, there's communion, and, Lutherans, there's beer, but there's definitely coffee. And so, in terms of taking care of people that have been through trauma. There's the large capital C church that needs lots of work and repair in its institution, but then meeting the people where they are and having conversations. Tell us more in terms of, like, your community and what your week looks like. Of course, we prepare for worship and a sermon, and we had to Joshua had to help print out a church bulletin and figure out where pages were in the Common Book of Prayer, that kind of thing. But, in terms of, your ministry during the week with the people, what does a typical week look like for you? Yeah.
I wish there was a typical week, right? I mean, it does feel like things are shifting all the time. But you're right. I mean, there are these commonalities and common threads through it. So we're talking to one another on a Monday. So my Monday, I've learned that I have to completely downshift after Sunday. Which you can probably even hear it in my voice. I've done a lot of talking and counseling and also chanting and singing over the last 4 days. So I tend to downshift and tend to my own soul and take time for even conversations like this, which for me are really filling in a different sort of way, right? And then Tuesdays and Wednesdays are about, getting prepared for what's coming for the weekend, coordinating with my staff that I'm working with. We also have an active preschool here at the church. And so in addition to being the rector, I'm also technically the headmaster and chaplain of the school. And so I lead chapel services for our 2, 3, and 4-year-olds there, which is really, really fun and also life-giving. Have those things. I try to do sermon preparation, homily preparation somewhere along there. It's a lot of also just being available to go and either have people come and meet with me or go visit them. My congregation demographically skews a little bit older than what I was accustomed to in my first ministry role as a church planter, where people were actually my age or younger for the most part. But here I'm probably one of the younger people who's a part of this congregation. So I'm that often comes with, and visiting people in hospital, visiting them at home. One of the things that's really important to our sense of identity here at St. Peter's is that we view ourselves as a church within a parish, which is our local community of Old Ellicott City. So I view myself as the parish priest, not just to the congregation, but to our parishioners, which are the people who live and work in Old Ellicott City. So I try to spend time with them. I do just literally go down and sit and have coffee in the local coffee shop. I'm actually trying to set up having regular quote unquote priest office hours where I'm down there and people know that and can come talk to me. And that often does happen.
You can put up one of those signs that say like a hot theological hot take and say, change my mind, and just have your coffee.
Yeah, that's right.
Do one of those things.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I like that. So yeah, it's all those sort of things. I'm also, in addition to my vocational work as a priest, my part of my vocation is being a partner to my wife. It is also being a husband, I already said husband, a father to my son. And my son is 4. And so he takes up a lot of my energy and time now, well-deservedly.
Is he in your preschool? Is he in your preschool as well?
He was when he was younger. He's now at a different school that just offers we only do a partial day program. He's at a full day program somewhere else. So, but he was.
Yeah, I mean, as you help me reflect on kind of my role in ministry too. Like I take care of the inner circle of the staff, and all these circles of Venn diagrams of overlap, the staff, and then the congregation itself, and then we're part of a university town, so the larger university, and then I'm a part of a synod, a diocese, and then I'm a part of a larger church, and then I'm next door neighbors to other Christian denominations that are, in kind of similar boats in terms of university town, but a different tradition, whether it's Methodist or Episcopalian. And so you're a steward or entrusted with all these different relationships, and you got to manage those and shepherd those. And we're also in this ministry of interruptions too. Like I have planned today, I'm going to write my sermon, and then you get a phone call, or someone comes with a question, or there's a tragedy, or someone needs some extra time and care, and you go and do those things. And actually, Bishop Curry, the bishop of your church, is a North Carolina native, and right down the road in Raleigh. And my Triangle Conference is having him as one of our guest speakers next week. So that's going to be fun. Sit down with Bishop Curry and listen to him chat. The legend that he is. So that's pretty fun.
Be prepared for not sitting back and listening. Like, it is a very active and participatory experience anytime you're with Bishop Curry. And he, I think he's now got a new lease on life, because he's now officially the former presiding bishop. His term came to an end actually over the weekend, and now we have a new presiding bishop. He served us for 9 years through a very challenging time, which is the typical max tenure. And so he's now released to go have fun with Lutherans, I guess, which is great.
Yeah. So you have a new presiding bishop that was elected this past weekend. Who is the bishop?
Well, he was elected at our most recent general convention over the summer, but then it officially was installed this last weekend. So Sean Rowe is his name. Yeah. So
Sean Rowe, out of
one
where?
of the youngest. Gosh, you're putting me on the spot here. He was serving in 2 different dioceses, but he is the youngest presiding bishop, I think, that we've had since like the earliest days of our church, when people didn't live very long. First generation X presiding bishop in the church, and very much interested in helping us kind of retool, reconfigure, reform how we do church, very much an organizational leadership mind. And it was really cool. He actually intentionally said, we're going to have this investiture big celebration, but we're not going to spend a lot of money on it because that's wasteful. So we're going to actually just have a few people join, and we're going to live stream it and have people participate digitally, because we don't need to increase our carbon footprint or waste a bunch of money on having one church service. And I was like, okay, I like this guy.
Yeah.
So
yeah, there you go.
Anyway.
Fun. Josh, as you hear Derek's story, you know his story, you've had time, there's things that lift up in terms of, you know Joshua and TJ, the whole church, in terms of what you want to make clear, or help rise to the surface some things he said about in terms of how to take care of a community or the church, going small, going big, or, in terms of what comes to mind that you hear in that story, Josh, that you want to make sure that the listeners hear what church life is like, priest life is like, church unity, healthy congregations and communities. Yeah.
So I think there's two things that come to mind for me that I think makes, maybe not necessarily unique. There's definitely other people who experience these things, but I think it adds important flavor, if you will, to Derek's context and story. And so the first one, well, actually, I'll let Derek answer. Derek, do you want a more happy question or a more sad question first?
Oh, just go with it. Whatever you want. It's good.
All right. So one of the things, I'll start happy. One of the things that I really appreciated about St. Peter's is their genuine desire for connection and care with the larger community. And so like the word at St. Peter's that they use is parish, which I think that's, Episcopalian churches or Episcopal churches use that word. And I learned from Derek that parish isn't just the actual church, but rather the larger community around the church. And St. Peter's takes that really seriously. And I know, Derek, you have some like community organizing background as well. And so I thought that might be a fun thing to highlight, kind of how you see your role as a priest, not just to the actual congregation at St. Peter's, but to the larger Old Ellicott City parish, because I know that's important to you.
Yeah. So, and this is a core theological idea that I know is important to many of us, but is very much highlighted within our tradition, which is that of being incarnational, right? That being in a particular place and that, to put it eloquently, stuff and place matters. And so, this is very much rooted in this idea of what some of the better parts of what parish has meant is that churches exist as hubs and places of connection and care for everyone who is there, not just for a particular group of people, not even just for the people who are quote unquote members, but for everybody who is there. And so there's a desire that I have to sort of reclaim and re-envision that idea of parish as helping to replace the church. And I use a hyphen there, not like replace it with something else, although, that's another conversation to have too. But to reroot it in place. I think churches have in many ways gone the ways of like franchise models and have taken more from the business world than they have from our theology around what it means to actually live in, with, and within place. And I'm borrowing language here from a book called The New Parish that a few guys wrote about this. But the idea that when you actually root yourself in a place, you are inextricably linked with the well-being of your neighbors, with the locality of what's going on, and so knowing them, which I think is like a bare minimum for if we're to love our literal neighbors, we should know them at least. Is a really key part of that. And a lot of community organizing theory is all about that. It's about knowing and being known. It's about building relationship, creating a relational culture, and building power through relationship that can then help you know your neighbors, know what keeps them up at night, know what gets them up in the morning, and then figure out how you can be good neighbors toward them and help them flourish. And so that's something that I want to see our church at St. Peter's and others to really reclaim that we're there for the flourishing of our community. And so what does that actually look like to work together towards that end? So we're a part of an organizing group here called PATH. We live in a place called Howard County, so it's people acting together in Howard. And we work together on listening to our community and then trying to build some relational power and connection to help to address some of the things that are preventing us from flourishing. And I think every church needs to be involved in some way, shape, or form in that kind of work. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a kind of multi-campus model, the online model, the franchise packaging model of churches, and then like you, my actual title here at Holy Trinity is parish pastor. We have a campus pastor. We're co-pastors together. She's the campus minister, reaching out to the campus at UNC and our campus ministry students and college students. But I'm the parish pastor, overseeing and shepherding the church here at Holy Trinity. But yeah, that the church taking up space. That we are incarnate. If we believe Christ became incarnate, God became incarnate in Christ, then maybe we should be the body of Christ with skin on to our neighbor around us and knowing our context. I love that, and it makes me it challenges me to do a deep dive on what the word parish actually means. And since it's a part of my title, thanks, Josh, for that. We got it. Cool.
Yeah. So. The other question that I want to ask, it's just one that I observed, and it has to do just with the particular demographics of St. Peter's, which, as you mentioned, is an older church. And so out of the 3 churches that I had worked in previously, so for a combined, 5-ish years or so that's not including the parachurch work that I did in ministry. But so those 3 churches, there was significantly more death at St. Peter's in the 1 year that I was there combined than all of those other churches. And you shared about the tragedy that took place at St. Peter's. One of the first tasks that I did with you when I got hired at St. Peter's was figure out how to legally ship someone's cremains in the mail. That was in the columbarium. And so I'm just curious, how has death and having to deal with death so frequently, how is that kind of, I don't know, how does that play into your context and into how you see your role as a priest? But also, I think that's something unique that I didn't experience before. And I'm not jealous of you. So it's a bit of a hard question, but I'd be curious your thoughts.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, and also very true for my own context and coming from a different ministry context and then stepping place into this. Although in between serving in different church contexts, I also worked for a nonprofit that served people who lived with HIV and AIDS. And so there was some exposure to some of the harder realities and some death as a part of that as well. People that I come to know. Yeah, I mean, you guys are talking to me after a particularly tough week for that kind of stuff. I had someone that a week ago Sunday, I visited in the hospital, and we have a part of our tradition is that we do something that sometimes called last rites or holy unction, where we gather around someone who is nearing death and we pray for them and we commend them into God's hands. And that involves prayer and Eucharist and usually like anointing and laying on of hands, and was able to do that for someone who I had gotten to know ever since coming to St. Peter's, and went from laying on of hands to him passing away the next day to doing his funeral this past Saturday. And so it's sobering. It's also incredibly deeply sacred and honoring work to do, to be invited in by people to help them hold space, and in many ways, like be a figure of Christ's love and presence to them, a reminder of God's presence. Now one uses this term, doesn't he? Being a living reminder. And so there's a weight to that is more than just grief. It's a sense of deep responsibility and privilege and honor. that of course impacts you. I'm actually still sort of, I think, teasing out some of the ways that is the case, even on a day like today. And I'll share another story. I think we'll talk a little bit later about like a God moment. I'll hold that for a second, but yeah, it does cause you to think about your own mortality, your own limitations, and it kind of restores a sense of urgency and focus into what it is I am really called to do, and how I will choose to do the next best thing today. Those are my like jumbled and not very polished thoughts about it, other than to say, it definitely does have an impact, and it is a deep blessing to be able to not just love the people that you serve, but have the opportunity to fall in love with them, truly get to know them, and then be able to speak with integrity at their funerals about who they are and how you know them, and how they also taught you about God. It's a blessing.
Yeah, I'll echo that too. It's like in terms of I've been at this particular congregation going on 13 years now, and so there are kids that babies that I baptized. They're now in my confirmation class. So it's good to see them grow up. But then there's people who a decade ago, we're in their 70s now, in their 80s, and we don't do we're intergenerational congregations. We don't do as many funerals, but when they happen, you're like people a long time that have been a deeply part. And so sometimes funerals can be the hardest, but also the easiest to preach, because their life story shares the story and witnesses to what it means to follow Christ. And so those can be some of the I was like, oh, I know exactly what I'm going to say. I have the outline in my head already. Like I just, but yes, that and I hear this theme, Derek, of you, in terms of being rooted down in your particular parish, but the people work. We sometimes think of church unity and ecumenical work, the big church councils and getting all the bishops together and getting our conference and diocese and big theological conferences where we can, come to agreement of how we understand the sacraments or women in ministry or whatever it is that we're, wrestling with as a larger church. But then it really is down to the people you're entrusted with in your local parish, the people work, the coffees, the grief work, and being by people when they lose a loved one, and knowing you don't have to say anything to fix anything, but just be present with them, and walking with them in their life stages and whatever they're wrestling with in life. That's where the church unity can do some good seed work, is knowing that you're taking care of your neighbor and neighborhood. And the larger church will take care of itself. It'll fall into place at some point, hopefully, if we don't let the institutions get in the way, or the nuanced things that can sometimes try to be bigger than they are. But it's really about the people and the relationships you're entrusted with. So, good question. Good question. So, Father Derek, in terms of ecumenical work and things, what would be like a vision for you in terms, you've seen the evangelical side of the church, and coming from a family deeply rooted in the Southern Baptist tradition, and then now you're in a more kind of liturgical, sacramental, higher church in terms of Episcopal Church. But in terms of, you had a vision for ecumenistry, a hope for the church at large, capital C, that with the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church that we say in the Creed every Sunday. I know your tradition, my tradition, both confesses that every Sunday. What would be a hope that we could work towards, or a vision in the weeks and months ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's related to that thread you helped to name well, which is that shared place, shared space, and what we might call, since the Episcopal Church Anglican tradition is a bit more rooted in kind of the Benedictine spirituality, that they take what they call a vow of stability, which means that you commit to being in a community for a long time. I think that my vision for that is that the people who share a space, share a place, and share a commitment to loving Christ and serving that community in Christ's name need to know one another, need to pray together, need to learn how to show up for one another, need to learn how to share what they have with one another. And so I think I agree with you. I don't think that's something that begins or consists in the stuff that happens at the higher levels, whether it's the higher levels of theological discussion or the higher levels of church order and polity. I think it happens very much grassroots and very much, across the table. And when we're sharing in some of those more tender moments and more difficult moments. So, I'm very grateful here we have a Howard County Clergy Alliance that's been started here that includes clergy, and it is not just Christian clergy; it's also interfaith. But we do connect significantly there, I think it's something that I know that I did not have the benefit of growing up as I did, where I did not have the opportunity to sort of cross-pollinate with other Christian traditions. I had a class that I was taught of like how to save Catholics, right? So this was a very different sort of approach, rather than truly sharing, breaking bread, sharing space together, and learning from one another, which is a lot of what I got to experience at the Ecumenical Institute. We were all there because we have a motto: faith seeking understanding, and understanding making a difference, and so we were all there seeking a deeper knowledge of faith, and we got to learn it directly from one another rather than caricatured versions. And that was such a gift, still is such a gift. So, my vision for that would be that I have only been changed and enriched when I've actually been able to just sit and learn from other Christians, and be challenged by them, and even have deep, like sometimes hot debates and discussions around stuff, but that we were still, at the table. We didn't get up and leave. So that's what I would hope for. And that at the very least too, there's going to be certainly a lot that we don't agree about, but I think if we can agree that some of the things that Jesus said, that we can agree that are valuable or important, like loving God with everything and loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. Like if we could commit ourselves to figuring out how to do that more together, that could really make a difference.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I think that's our tangible action for today. It's like go sit and have coffee with somebody, cross-pollinate, go have a conversation. I just over the weekend saw the movie Conclave. I don't know if you guys have heard about this movie that's out there. And it's that it is like the conclave of choosing a new bishop. a new pope, right? But what they literally do is they lock themselves in a room, these cardinals. And in this room, even though they're all under the umbrella of Roman Catholicism, you have the Catholics, you have the liberals, you have those who are like want women to have more part of ministry. You have those who are Americans, the Italians, the South America. They're all in this room together, and they come from different places, even sitting at different tables with each other and clumping, almost like a high school lunchroom kind of situation. But the intrigue of what's going to happen towards the end and who they choose as Pope, all these conversations about literally being locked in a room with each other and having meals together and sleeping in the same quarters with each other was really powerful, kind of mirror of like how we can move forward as a church, capital C, not just Catholic or Episcopalian or Lutheran, but sitting down and have authentic conversations, not cross-pollinate with an agenda and like I'm gonna change you to be like me, but like I legitimately want to learn who you are and your story, and I'm more curious how you experience God. I think that's what's going to get us to a point where we go from little lowercase c to our own individual communities to uppercase, seeing us as the whole church together. And there's my sermon for the day. But your story, Derek, kind of teased that out of me and to think through those things. And I highly recommend that movie, but also kind of see it through the lens of not just Roman Catholicism, but how do we all, what tables are we sitting out? Who are we having conversations with? What are we wrestling with? Our doubts, our certainties, what we think our certainties are not, all comes into play.
Yeah. Like I think a great thing could be like, there's stuff happening in our local context all the time. We're right in the midst of like a really intense, heightened time around the election and politics and that sort of stuff. But like, how amazing would it be to invite somebody from a different church tradition to like go to the county council meeting together and then have coffee after and talk about it, or, show up at the community meeting to listen and then discuss it and be like, hey, this is how my faith informs how I think about this. I'd love to hear about how yours does. Like, what do you think about it? These are just like, and not to fix it, not to like get them to vote for one thing or the other, but just be like, let's pay attention to stuff that's going on in our community and how we think about it together. So anyway.
Yeah, beautiful. Love it. All right, we're going to transition. Unless there's, Josh, you have anything that you wanted to share, anything kind of teased out that, I don't want you to go to lunch today or go to bed tonight and go, God, I wish I asked that question.
Oh, you guys are good. I like the direction both of you took that in. So y'all are the professional ministers. I'm just a dude who's hanging out,
That's right.
So
there's often days I feel like I'm just hanging out and we'll see where it goes. Often. Very often.
Yep, I agree.
Now, hey, you talk about like the professional part of it. Not that that's a triggering word for me, Josh, thanks. But no, but I think there is a sense when you're like, oh man, that the vow of stability, or solidarity, or sitting with a community for long periods of time. There's dangers with that, where a community could take on the character of its leader and not know how to untangle from that. But in terms of walking with people long term to really get to know people, I think is there is coming right out of seminary, I had all the answers. I couldn't wait to preach all the answers at people, and then after a while I'm like, oh wow, I think I need to listen. I'm more curious about the questions than I am about what kind of answer I'm going to give them. And I don't know if that's just over the years maturing or chilling out a little bit, but I legitimately like, I am intrigued by people's stories and the questions they have and what's behind it all. And before ready to give them a track on how to save them from being Catholic, I guess. No, I love the Catholic views. That frustrates me, but I understand, where people are coming from and those kinds of things.
I do too.
So let's transition to the God moment. As we kind of land this plane, as we wrap up this conversation, we start with introducing ourselves and silly question and tangible actions and our stories and as tradition has it here at the Whole Church podcast, a God moment where we saw God alive and active in the world. It could be a small thing, could be a big thing. All God moments are genuine moments where we feel God's presence. Derek, you said you had one that you wanted to share. I'm looking forward to hearing it. What's a God moment for you?
Yeah. So it happened so in our church, we celebrate all these different feast days. And so we just celebrated on Friday, All Saints Day, which is November 1st, and had an evening service for that. And, it's a Friday night church service, so not going to have our biggest turnout. So it was a small group of us gathered. But I was carrying into that service some of my own grief about this funeral that I just mentioned, and then also got notice that there's a couple in our church who had a very young child, very very premature child that was born very early in the NICU, who had been there for about 2 weeks and had actually been making a lot of improvements, and then very suddenly had a big downturn and was not looking good. And so I was kind of carrying that into the service. And literally after I finished preaching my homily and I sat down, my watch pinged me because I forgot to turn off my notifications. And I get a text that they tell me that their son has died in the NICU. And there was something really profound for me about preaching that day. Was our lectionary gave us the story about Lazarus, and a lot of the readings had to do with death, and that I just preached about how as Christians we face death differently as people who Jesus, that Jesus grieved death, that he also showed up to the grave angry at death. That's one of our that doesn't get talked about a lot, but it says that he was quote greatly disturbed, but the original word there is actually like incensed, angry, or indignant at death, and that he also like speaks hope and raises us up to new life. And to preach that in the midst of the death of like a 27-week-old NICU baby.
Yeah. Mm.
And then to go directly from that service to go and hold that space in the NICU with them. I deeply felt the presence of God in that space.
Yeah, it's almost like you want to remove your shoes, that you're on holy ground, right?
It's very holy.
If the hospital would let you take your shoes off. But I think that it is this holy ground. Like that's it. It's the joy of birth and new life, but also the fragility of life and holding that space for those who grieve. I share that with you. We have the All Saints tradition here as well, and we read off the names of people who've died in the last year, loved ones, and ring a bell. And there's a few on that list who I oversaw their memorial service and celebration of life and funeral with their families. And so when their name comes up, it hits close to home. My other God moment is October 31st, All Hallows Eve, Reformation Day for Lutherans. But we have this tradition we've grown in our neighborhood where we're at the end of a wrong street and driveway. And so it's not easy. Like if you're not paying attention, the kids won't come down that road. So we have to set out like luminaries and smoke machines to lure kids to my house for candy. Any other day that would sound really weird, but on Halloween, that is it's legit.
Totally
it's fine.
Socially
like
acceptable.
If I try to do that on Sunday, it would be like, we're going to arrest you, dude. But on Halloween, we lure down. And Cindy learned, my wife, that she puts out this kind of Bose radio, and as she sees the kids walking down the driveway with a certain costume on, she'll say, "Hey Siri, play the theme song of whatever." So the kid walks up through the smoke machine and luminaries to our house, hearing their theme song of what they're dressed up as. So, and they love it so much. And so she was like, "What is that?" And I was like, "I think I don't have young kids." So I was like, "Bluey. I think it's that Bluey phenomenon." She was like, "Play the theme song for Bluey." And this kid, when he heard the theme song for Bluey, started dancing and smiling and jumping for joy. I was like, this is the best thing. It was so, and the parents were like, wow, this is ingenious. Like, tell your friends to come back for candy. But the just that kid hearing its theme song dressed up as that on Halloween was just a beautiful moment of the joy of life that you see on kids' face, and parents loved it too. Cool. Josh, you got a God moment? What other than like hanging with us at beer camp and me helping you move beer at that awesome conference. Other than those, what are some God moments?
Yeah, so I want to share like an overall experience I had on Saturday. Because like, I don't know, for me personally, I'm in like a weird in-between space in my faith where, on my good days, I affirm God that looks very much like the God of process theology. So that's a very specific, right, understanding of the divine. And then on other days, it's more difficult. And I kind of sit in this space of kind of like radical theology, specifically the work of someone like John Caputo, who talks about, basically, he doesn't posit any kind of ontological being called God, but rather talks about God as the name of an event. So when we love our neighbor in that event, that's when God existed. Like that event itself is the divine. And so I'm bouncing around these weird spaces. I actually did a poetry reading for the first time ever in my life the other day. And I wrote a poem, and the opening line for it was God is dead. And so it kind of gives you this weird space that I'm in. And Saturday, I got to have a really cool conversation with Dr. Taylor Thomas, who is a theologian, a philosopher of religion, and her expertise is Paul Tillich. And Paul Tillich is known for talking about God as the ground of being, the kind of wellspring that all things that are flow out of. And so we had a really interesting conversation wrestling about the existence or non-existence of the divine, which I think that moment was a God moment because, especially within the Jewish tradition, it's in the wrestling, the whole like cheesy evangelical line of iron sharpens iron, that they like to point out. But I think there's reality to that. So I think I experienced maybe God or God perhaps, as Caputo would say, in that wrestling with Taylor. But then after that, I got to go hang out at my friend Nick's house. We watched Crown Jewel together, which is a pay-per-view or a PLE, a premium live event for WWE. And so I got to watch that with Nick and his boys, and which was a lot of fun. And then at the end of the night, when Nick and Lindsay were putting the kids to bed, they invited me to participate in their like family prayer that they do at nighttime when they put the kids to bed. So they did the Lord's Prayer, and then all of them went around and said something that they're grateful for. And it was that moment felt like really special and like a God moment. And I've shared with Father Derek before, when kids, there's something about small children participating in religious, I don't know what you call it, things. Participating within, yeah, right. I was going to say, if we're going to lean into Tillich, participating within the religious symbolism of Christianity, right? Which, if you're a Tillich person, you know, never say a symbol is just a symbol or you don't understand what it is. Symbols are always participate within the reality that they point to. And so at St. Peter's, Derek often invites the kids to come forth during the gospel reading, and they kind of all get excited and stand around and listen to it, or they'll carry up like a basket during the offering or something. And those are moments in the service like make me cry and I don't know why. And so also getting to participate in these little kids, you know, saying the Lord's Prayer and then saying what they're thankful for, you know, that's a God moment, whether it's, you know, my process God or the God that is the name of an event. That event of prayer was holy and a God moment. So
I love that.
That was my Saturday.
And we love Taylor. If you're not out there following Tillich Today on Instagram or following the podcast, you should. She's hilarious and very smart. Both those together is very entertaining. I for a children's message here on Reformation Sunday, we hand out Bibles to our second graders, and I started pointing out some favorite Bible verse of mine to the kids. I was like, oh yeah, there's this one too. Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, and God's Spirit hovered over the waters. And I said, you know what that means, right, kids? And they were like, it's dead silence. It's like, God's a surfer. And God was hovering over the waters. And then a 4-year-old beside me, it got quiet, and he went, obviously. Was his like audible, loud, like obviously. And I was like, you just made me so happy, kid. And the whole congregation giggled. And I was like, no, he's right.
You got to get him to endorse your book, Will. Get the kids.
That's going to be the
kids' endorsement just
book.
As obviously with his
obviously Tobias Creer. 4-year-old Tobias Creer. Quote unquote. Yeah, that's the quote on the back of the book. Is God a surfer? Quote unquote. Obviously. No, those are beautiful moments, and that's our, you know, the long game and the work of this podcast and others is, yes, church unity and find a way to sit the table together and have these authentic conversations, but also finding the God moments in the small things and the holy sacred things and the hard things of death and reframing and deconstruction. All those things are part of our story that is a part of our work here at this podcast Beyond. Derek, it's super fun meeting you through this means. Hopefully our paths will cross again. Josh and I's paths will cross again. I think we got something lined up at some point where we'll hang out. As TJ likes to share at the end of these podcasts, make sure you share this podcast with a friend, an enemy, or a cousin. I don't know what cousin TJ is passively aggressively want to reach out to with this podcast, but I'm sure they're out there. So we'll share it with our cousins, and of course, do all the things you're supposed to do when you have a podcast. Share it, like it, subscribe, all those things. And as I see here at the end of it, hope you enjoyed the show. Due to some hard times in Joshua's life, our schedule is a little shaky at the moment, but rest assured that before long, the Whole Church podcast will be right back on track to get Francis Chan on the show for the end of season 1, which is an ongoing bit, regardless of your feelings of Francis Chan. I think this podcast has been going on for many years, and we're still in season 1. So yeah, that's the bit they like to do, and I kept it going. You're welcome, Joshua and TJ. Thanks for listening, folks. We love you, and keep striving and share the faith, share the geek.
Thank you for listening to the Whole Church Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Remember, you can always sponsor our efforts to educate and unite the church on Captivate, Patreon, or Apple Podcast. If you're not into the subscription thing, again, you can leave a one-time tip on our Captivate website down below in the description notes. Thank you again, and please come back next week.